we've got a special treat for you, because when I said that Sergio would run a couple of machines, he's actually going to run a set which are at the back of the gallery, which that's about 16, 17 minutes worth of show still to come, so that's a real beauty for you. So yeah, forward to that in a few minutes time. But first, we'll get to know our guest tonight just a little bit better. John Gale, we have a new album out today. You are known for electronic music, and I think there's something that when you see someone with a table for these things connected up, you tend to think of them as coming from the angle of being some kind of electronic boffin. But I think what's really interesting about your music is where you're coming from is a whole range of other things. It's not that sort of academic electronic thing. You're coming from jazz, you're coming from folk, you've been involved in all sorts of music making and staging of events. You're just a really, open-minded person. And maybe it'd be nice to sketch in for people just to get to know a lot more about Tom, some of the background to that, because does it begin with jazz or does it begin with folk?
No, it actually begins in 1979 with kind of post-punk wave. In fact, the guitarist in the first band I ever played in is here. And the bass player in the second band that I was ever in is also here. So yeah, it was late 70s.
Clearly you didn't have incendiary breakups.
No.
It's not like John Mackay leaving Susie and the Banshees and never making music again.
We were never together long enough for that. I mean, the other thing as well, and what you were saying about the whole, I don't think of music in academic terms anyway. The other thing is I don't read the manuals for anything. Any of the things I have.
Sorry, you mean you get manuals for this thing?
I mean, if there was something I specifically wanted to check, then I would. But generally speaking, I just kind of get on with it. And I don't know. I mean, this is some sort of kind of, I don't know what you would call it. There's a term for them, and it's just left my head.
Sampler?
Well, it's not a sampler. It's a kind of beat, kind of sequencer kind of thing. And but that's not really how I use it.
So they're used in an unorthodox way.
Yeah, I think so. And this is new, so I'm just finding out about it. So I'm just using it as an effects processor at the moment. And then there's a sequencer and that's a sampler, and that's a wee drone machine. Yeah. And for those people who were born after the year 2000, it's a tape recorder. And it's just tape loops. There's a guy in Ireland who makes up tape loops for just blank ones. You have to put the content on it yourself. Yeah. And various pedals, but yeah. But I played with a band called the Tartan Amoebas for a number of years, played a couple of albums with them. I played in all over the UK, Europe, a couple of gigs in North America and stuff like that. We were quite successful at the time. Never made any money, but we were quite successful. Excuse me. And but I did play jazz. I mean, I had a saxophone when I was 15. My parents bought me a saxophone, but I improvised with it. I couldn't really play it, couldn't read music. But there you go.
I don't think Art Tatum could read music either. It didn't seem to do him any harm.
But he was blind, he had an excuse.
Well, Paul McCartney can.
Yeah. But yeah, and I went to university in '93. Went to Napier University, the music course there, and it was a classical music course, and I hadn't played a note of classical music in my life. Like I said, I'd played in these kind of post-punk bands and various other things like that. And I told them I was a jazz musician because I thought if I tell them that's what I do, there's no way I'm going to get in. Anyway, but I got in by the skin of my teeth, and that was a great experience. And I played some jazz gigs. There's a guy, a brilliant guitar player called Francis Cowan, who started off as a bass player and got an upright bass player, played with all these really famous American jazz musicians, and then decided he'd taken it far enough and taught himself to play the guitar and became a brilliant guitar player. So yeah.
Another facet of Tom is as a programmer of music with Glasgow Life and with the concert halls in Glasgow. And he's been involved in putting on big events like Steve Reich's 70th birthday, was it?
Yeah, I think it was his 70th.
70th, and the Chemical Brothers and so on.
No, it was the I think it was, oh, I can't remember, it wasn't Chemical Brothers, something else.
It was some big banging tunes type
it was
stuff.
Orbital. Sorry.
Yeah. Orbital, sorry.
Yeah, that was interesting because I was told, get us somebody big. So I managed to get.
You got somebody so big I couldn't remember the name.
Yeah, I immediately found the agent's details for Aphex Twin, and I contacted them, and they weren't interested. And then I got in touch with Underworld's management, and they kind of were interested, but then that went cold. And the guy, the Orbital's manager, he was a really interesting guy, said, yeah, they're actually going to be on tour, which I kind of knew. They were bringing out an album, they were going to be on tour. And yeah, Tom, and you could hear him puffing on his cigar. Yeah, Tom, what's the money? What's the money? I said, I don't know, I'm not dealing with the money, I'm just,
You do the art, man.
Yeah. And somebody else dealt with the money. It was expensive.
Yeah. I think what's been great about you in that role is that you were dealing with big shows and other people who handle big money and so on, but you also facilitated the access to lovely concert hall premises for the kind of artists who might otherwise end up playing in a pub or whatever, instead of being given the platform somewhere like the recital room in the city halls. Just lovely spaces and lovely staff to deal with, and just a really nice thing. And Tom, for years, okay, the funding has changed and these things have been scaled down, and unfortunately he doesn't have a chance to do that anymore. But I think it's a big thank you from a lot of Scottish artists and artists from international diaspora as well, who got the chance to play in that space, and it's just magical stuff that they were able to do. And if somebody else had been in the job, those gigs would not have happened.
Well, the great thing about that is I approached my boss, who was the musical director of the concert halls, with the idea of doing it. And he said, oh, Tom, I'm not real sure, I'll have to think about it. And the next day he went on holiday, so we just booked it in anyway.
For years.
And yeah, I think we got 5 or more years.
Yeah, it was great. Yeah. So films and all sorts of things around as well.
Yeah, it was some great events, and then I got some funding from Scottish Arts Council and managed to bring people like Ben Frost and Biosphere and various others, Tim Hecker.
Yeah, Ron Geeson.
Ron Geeson was just fabulous. What a lovely, lovely guy, and an extraordinary concert as well.
Yeah. But, which ended up being filmed and becoming part of the Ron Geeson documentary film.
Yeah.
But I think it was Murray Grigger that made that, wasn't it?
I'm not sure.
Yeah.
But it was a great experience because, when you're given that opportunity, and especially with that particular event, because it was funded, I sat down basically one day and thought, well, who do I like? And that was the people I booked. I had brilliant. The first we kicked off, I think, there's a brilliant label in London called Touch, and it was just happened to be their 30th birthday, I think it was. So it was Touch 30 event with Philip Jack and B.J. Nielsen and Thomas Cooner. And it was just fabulous. I mean, the thing about those events is not very many people came to see them. So just because the people you like's maybe not the best thing. But they were but the people that did come along to those gigs, you know, and Ben Frost, who cost an absolute fortune, and there was just over 100 people came to it, and absolutely loved it. And I remember when he came in to the old fruit market, that's where the gig was, and he says, "What's you know, how many tickets have sold?" I said, "Well, just over 100." And he was really disappointed. I said, "But Ben, man, it's going to be 100 people who absolutely love you."
And they did.
And he absolutely had a ball, and he drank all his rider, which was quite thin. The guy who played drums with him, actually, he drank all the whiskey himself. He just walked about with a bottle of whiskey. But yeah, it was good.
Yeah. New album out today.
Yep.
And this is where, you know, declaration of interests. He asked me to produce it, and that was a very, very enjoyable and interesting experience indeed. And was a lot of it was much more acoustic and guest artists. And
Yeah.
it was not there's electronica there, of course, but you know, we went to different spaces and recorded piano and recorded different instruments in different places as well.
Well, I mean, the good thing about that is I applied to Creative Scotland for funding to record it. If I hadn't got the funding, I would have still made an album, but it wouldn't have been this album. You know, and you know, having that funding allowed me to do the things that I want to do. You know, working with yourself, working with Gail, Rogan Pefkin, and Jaylan Hay, who played harmonium on it, and Jim McEwen, who mastered it. And so there's nobody here from Creative Scotland, I don't think, but I'd like to thank them anyway, just in case. Because you know, that allowed me to make that album, and as I said, I would have made an album anyway, but it just wouldn't have been. It just wouldn't have been. But funnily enough, everyone approached, you know, when I approached you and approached Gail and Jaylan and said, I'm, you know, I've applied for funding, and obviously you need to put on the application form who's going to be involved and all the rest of it. And all three of you said, even if you don't get the funding, we'd like to work on it anyway. Don't tell Creative Scotland. But it would have been a different, a different album, I think, anyway. You know. So, and it was. I mean, the big worry I had is because I'm not really into going into the studio for like 8 hours at a time. I'm like 2 or 3 hours. And I kind of really worried that John was going to think I was just, you know. But I mean, it's amazing how much we got done in those 2 or 3 hours.
It's better to 3 hours productive than 8 hours slogging away for nothing.
Yeah. So, but it was a great experience, especially for someone in the twilight years.
Talking about me, dear.
So no, it was fantastic. It was fantastic. It's out today. There's some cards here with the link to the records company, whoever they are, Komponist, who were last night from Glasgow. I don't think there's anybody here from Komponist, but I'd like to thank them as well. They released the previous album as well.
Yeah. This one's called the Saint Bartholomew Leisure Suit, which is a nice collision of words. Is it also what the smart-dressed intelligentsia is wearing this season?
Well, yeah. I mean, that came about. One of the things I love, and it's kind of obvious in the set tonight, is medieval vocal music, and some of the art that goes into it. And if you know anything about Saint Bartholomew, he was flayed alive. And the artwork from the Renaissance is absolutely fantastic, because there's some of the things where he's standing with his skin over his arm with a big smile on his face, and that's where the St. Bartholomew Leisure Suit came from. Was seeing those pictures and thinking that's just mental. But that's Renaissance art for you. There's some
Indeed,
brilliant
and if
weird
anybody
stuff.
follows the medieval art memes on Instagram, that just come up with the most bonkers bits of craziness.
Yeah.
What was the imagination? What was going on?
Yeah.
Another one of Tom's lesser known talents is he's also a barber.
Thanks. Well, I do cut my own hair, but I don't normally cut it this short. I usually 5/8, and last weekend I was cutting my hair, and I oiled my hair clippers and forgot to put the thing on and just went for it. So I had to. I mean, it was wonderful.
Remember that David Crosby song, Almost Cut My Hair? Me seeing it, it's been really cut my hair.
I mean, I have to say, I just laughed. I just laughed. I mean, there's nothing else you can do. I mean, I'm not. You know.
You wear it well. It's looking good.
Thanks.
Yeah.
I mean, I brought a hat along just in case I lost my nerve about going follically naked.
Looking well, looking well. Any questions? Anybody want to fire any words at this man?
I have a small question. Can you talk a little bit about the nature of performance in what you're doing? Because it feels very much like there is a performance inherent in what you're doing in your movements.
Yeah, I mean, I think the thing about electronic music is there's not an awful lot to look at. You know, it's a guy sitting behind some machines, or a lady sitting behind some machines. There's some fantastic, I don't mean that in a patronising way, there's some fantastic female electronic music musicians out there now, and I wish when I was doing the project that I'd done earlier in the 2000s that I'd known about them, because I definitely would have tried to get them, because some of the stuff they're doing is just fantastic, and it's a lot of modular stuff as well. I mean, for me, I mean, I just do it. I don't put. There's a lot of thought goes into putting it together, but you know, when I come to performing, it's not something that I consciously think about. Somebody like William Basinski, he's very flamboyant. I don't know if you know William Basinski. He's the guy that's done. He uses tape loops, big tape loops, but uses really old tape. So when they're playing, they start to degrade, and it's really interesting. And he's really flamboyant when he's performing. But you know, that's not me. I just stand or sit or move around from one bit to the other. But I mean, it's kind of all worked out. What's coming next? I mean, I have to write it down because I've not got a brilliant memory. So I know what's happening.
Just winding back to sound labs and the like, and in parenthesis, that were, at least it wasn't all a boys' game either, because there were plenty of women who did play sound lab, and women artists like Colleen Cecily
Yes.
Short, and also women filmmakers like Kate Burke.